Upon reflection, having longer, I wouldn't say that 99% of scripts are garbage. It's up to you, the writer, to say, take all that back and say, first of all, are they right? And second of all, if they are right, how do I fix it? And I think that's the one area where you can't rush. If it's like building the foundation of the house. If the foundation of the house is bad,
how did you go from reading screenplays for free to then getting hired to be a script reader?
Right. Well, that job I was talking to you about, working for that producer, that first thing that cracked me into the system, I was reading them for free. I was an intern in my mid-20s, but it was a foot in the door, right? Then I got the job with Norman Lear, and that's when I was sort of being paid to read scripts. That was one of my main jobs, besides administrative duties of being an assistant to a producer's or a vice president at a production company. That was one of my main remits, was to read scripts. Many years down the road, after working for several production companies and networks and things like that, I switched over to the dark side and became a writer myself. And on my way to pay the bills, I offered my vast knowledge of story theory to be a script reader for, I worked for various companies like Script Shark. I don't even know if they're still around anymore. I would go over to their offices, pick up a load of scripts that people wanted covered or get notes on, and I would read them and have to turn them around in a week or a few days, and would have to give them my thoughts on what they can do to make it better.
And just as a side, so you were, as an intern, you'd gone to film school, flown from DC area to LA, and you were doing an unpaid internship.
Yeah.
May I ask, were you doing any moonlighting to pay the bills? Like, how does one do that?
Right.
In an expensive city like LA?
Well, what I was predominantly, the temping was really how I made my money. So it wasn't glamorous at all. I signed up with like 3 or 4 of them. I assume they're still around, but I had to sign up with them and call in every morning and say, do you got anything? And then they'd call me within the next hour. And if I didn't hear anything by 8:30, I wasn't working that day. But I would go everywhere. I would go to sit on desks in Disney and Sony and at Paramount and at MGM, all over the place. I mean, I ended up at virtually every Warner Brothers, virtually every lot. Could be anywhere. Sometimes I was working in a creative area. Sometimes I was working in home video. Sometimes I was working at a lawyer's, in the legal department. Sometimes I was working in the marketing department. It didn't matter. Eventually, I had a friend who worked at Sony, and they had something called the floater pool, which is sort of an in-house coverage of desks and assistants. And she got me on that. So I was technically a Sony employee, but that meant that I was only there and working in Culver City. And I would just, whoever needed me, I would just sit on the desk. Essentially a in-house temp. But it paid reasonably well. And from then because I was there, and also my internship happened to be at across the street, I could just, on my lunch break, go over there, check in, pick up the scripts I had to read, take them home. And it was at that point that I started to get to know the people at the production company better, because I wasn't just, my face was showing up more. I was just sticking my head in a lot more. And I think that's a good lesson to people if they want to break in, is to get yourself out there, mix, mingle, and in any way that you can, because you never know when that next opportunity or that next person that you might meet who might open a door for you.
Yeah, sometimes I think temping gets a bad rap. Not that I did too much of it, but there's a freedom in that you're not really a threat to anyone's job because you're just a quote unquote a temp.
Right.
And people actually sometimes treat you better. You get you can be berated by somebody because you're just a temp, but sometimes I think it's actually, there's freedom. You don't have a plaque on your cubicle where someone's like, oh, that's the new guy? Okay. Right. So there is a beauty to it. I don't know.
I learned a lot being a temp. You learn, I wasn't really, when I was in DC, I wasn't working in offices necessarily. And I knew that if I was going to be working for producers, above the line producers, not a line producer or something like that, I knew that there was going to be an etiquette that I'd have to learn about answering phones properly and using, dating myself, but in the 90s, computers were still not as robust as they are now, and they weren't as ubiquitous then as they are now. So there were, just how do you use all these interoffice things and how do you act, and learning names of people. Like when so-and-so calls, I know, oh, that's an important person. I can't flub it, or I have to, get my person that I'm on the desk for right away. And that just takes knowledge. But more for me was there was also all these resources that were around. Like this, back in the day, there was the Hollywood Creative Directory. I don't know if you remember that or not, but it was a list of all the production companies in the town and who worked at them. It was, I think IMDb bought them at one point, IMDb, or whoever owns IMDb, Amazon bought them too and merged them together. So the IMDb Pro that you see now is what these directories were at the time. And so they have one for managers, they have one for production companies. I think they had one for PR or something like that. But they had all the addresses and they had all the phone numbers and they had all the people who worked there. So I could just get them one,
right,
call, and just say, hey, do you guys need any assistants or readers over there? No, we don't. Next one, do you need anything? Yeah, why don't you send your CV over? Okay. And I got a couple interviews off of just cold calling.
Right, much different world then.
Yeah.
The world of WordPerfect.
I'm old.
It's okay. I remember it too. So, but yeah, no. I think also too, because now we're inundated with so much, being sold information or wrong people getting information.
Right.
It's just a different world. Everything's closed down. So
yes.
I think it was freer then in some sense. But
I still don't see if one wanted to invest in IMDb Pro or Letterboxd or one of these things, and it's kind of like LinkedIn, where you can at least get the sense of who works for whom and how they're connected to one another. And understanding that web of connection and family trees of who worked for what producers and what actors worked and with which directors and so on and so forth, having that general knowledge is very useful if you ever get into a interview situation or just a conversation with someone who you don't know could potentially help you. But if you seem knowledgeable and you have a general sense of what's going on and how people are related, they're going to, if I were to hire someone, that person looks like they know what's going on in the industry at any given time. There are also information on there about, offices and emails and whatnot. I don't think anyone who works in this business, especially at the producer level, they're all salespeople. And at a certain level, they will admire someone who has the chutzpah to reach out in such a way. If someone did that to me, I would think, well, they at least want it. They're at least eager. And I don't see why I don't see why trying would be so terrible.
Sure, and you will try, just from speaking from experience, and you will also get your head handed to you by certain people who are like, who are you and why would you ever think you could contact me? So you'll learn that lesson too. But most of the people probably won't do that.
Right.
But also following protocol of not sending something unsolicited.
Yes.
But yeah, there will be those times where you will get knocked down and have to get back up and brush yourself off because somebody's just completely berated you. How did you get this number?
Yeah.
Who are you? Don't ever call here again.
You will get your share of that, like when you're in sales, like it's a numbers game. You're just trying to get that one. But it's also, but you're right, you can't just send your screenplays to these places willy-nilly. You'll go right to the delete file. Usually they'll need you to come through some sort of representation, whether it's a lawyer or a rate agent or a manager. I mean, unless you get a chance to meet a producer or someone who works for them or an executive in a studio or someone who works for them, and you figure out a way to get them to say yes, you know, whether it's at a pitch fest, if they have those anymore, or if you happen to win a screenplay competition and you talk to them, you say that. Yeah, you have to be careful.
Your bio says you've read over 6,000 scripts?
Oh, yeah.
I'm
sure many people have read many, many more by this point. Yeah, back in the day, when you were reading this is the height of the spec script market back in the 90s and the early 2000s. This was, you know, after Shane Black had done his magic with The Long Kiss Goodnight and Lethal Weapon and all the, you know, everyone wanted the next hot thing. And so every week, thousands, you know, our production company would get thousands, not thousands, I'm sorry, they would get tens, dozens of scripts that would come in, and they had to be read. And so between that stuff that had to be read and samples that came around, between the stuff I did as a reader, where you'd be getting 5 scripts a week, 5 scripts a week. Yeah, that's about right. 5, 6 scripts a week that you'd have to turn around in a week. It adds up over time.
Why do you say that recognizing good writing is innate?
There's something about being human and present that, and especially if you watch a lot of television or film, where you kind of have a sense of what works and what doesn't. You have read books, you get a sense of flow of what good writing is, or what, you know, you've read Huckleberry Finn, you've read Mark Twain, you've read the English Masters or whatnot. You know that feels like flow. It's evocative, and the story progresses in a way that makes you want to turn the page, or that the characters that are in whatever it is sound like people, or are interesting. Because when you get to the screenplays and you're reading them, you can very much, just from how the writer has written on the page and how the characters sound, you can pretty much understand that this is going to be good or bad writing within the first page or two, usually the first page. And there was a time when I was home for Thanksgiving, when I had my sack of scripts that I brought home, and my sister wanted to know, well, what do you read? What do you do? So I said, well, here you go, have a look. And she took one that was just a generic, I mean, I don't want to say generic, that's awful, but some writer had written that was represented by some agency. And she started reading it, and she was having a hard time with it. She was struggling with it. The narration lines were clunky. The dialogue felt stilted. She couldn't really envision what was going on in the script well. And she gave up on it after about 5 or 10 pages. Okay. Then she grabbed another one from the stack, and within a few lines, she was laughing. And probably in the same amount of time that the other one she gave up in, she would about 30 pages or 40 pages into the script. She was just flicking through it really great and laughing and laughing and laughing. And that script term was American Pie. Okay. So she knew, being a complete novice, no film school training, no story theory training, no idea who Blake Snyder or Sid Field is, you know, never read a screenplay in her life, only a casual moviegoer. And she understood that that was something that could potentially be made.
Is that her favorite movie now?
You know, I haven't asked her in a long time, but
But that's really cool. But
yeah.
so she knew, I don't know what industry she's in, but she just knew that this one flows, this one doesn't, this one I don't even want to read it anymore.
There was an energy to the script. There was energy, I think is the right word. It was told in a very succinct way. The action lines were very succinct, yet were evocative and created an image in her mind. The comedic situations that the characters found them in were sharp and clear. The dialogue was great and was right for the time and for that script. And I think that, you know, the writer of it set up predicament for the characters. You know, I mean, obviously we know the famous pie scene and the, you know, of being caught, that when the dad comes in, I think the dad comes in and like catches him or something in the pie. And, you know, just the writers of that, who I can't remember their names, did a great job of having teenage innocence along with over-the-top comedy and got the balance just right. And there was something else, because I was talking about theme earlier on. What that film did well was each character had a different relationship with their first time. One character was all they were looking forward to. Another, it was, you know, they were looking at how stereotypes of teenagers means that partners that probably kids who thought they wouldn't be together then did get together once they got to know each other. But the best one was the characters who were boyfriend, girlfriend, and it ruined their relationship. That is a very deep understanding of the topic, okay? That's what I'm talking about, theme, and showing an idea from 360 point of view. My sister, in reading that, I think understood that and appreciated that on a deeper level when you see it written as opposed to when you see it on the screen.
Wow. And then there were subsequent American Pies after that.
There
so
were many.
Obviously,
there were many.
Yeah, so she wasn't wrong in terms of, she knew that it was, there was something, you know, catching.
When her son went to band camp, it was a complete.
And his name was Stifler. No, I'm just kidding. Okay. We hear a lot of people say that 99% of screenplays are garbage, okay? So that's a common thing where, especially nowadays, we're hearing more of that. You've worked in development and you have read a lot of scripts. When people say that 99% of screenplays are garbage, you think that's really true? What is it that they're referring to? What is that that's making it seem like garbage in their eyes?
You know, upon reflection, having longer, I wouldn't say that 99% of scripts are garbage. I would say that a vast majority of them are okay. They're all right. There's something about them there are garbage ones, no doubt about that. I've read those. But there are many that are, you know, there's a character that's decent, or there's a few scenes that are well written and interesting. But on the whole of the whole thing, they don't rise above. Okay? They get to a certain level and they're okay, you know, but they're not good enough or intriguing enough to break through to something that needs to be considered to be made. So you asked me, like, you said 99% of them are garbage.
Yeah, and is that really true that it's become very fashionable right now to bash, and I don't know, maybe it was the same in the 90s when you were working in the studios and reading these things, but it feels like it's become a new thing where people are enjoying bashing things.
Well, I mean, we have social media now too.
True.
We have trolls, and we have, I remember, this is getting off tangent, but I remember we had things when we were working in development, we had things called tracking groups. I'm sure they still have them now. The idea is because you would get a bunch of friends, each one who would work or be related to a different studio. Okay, so I might have been at Paramount, and I had a friend who was at a production company at Sony, and then I had one who was at Universal, maybe one was at Lionsgate. And the point is that you're all getting different material, okay? And that you would all be, you know, you might be getting different books, or you might be getting different screenplays in from the agencies. And so you were sharing information that you could then take to your superiors, and so you just be like, hey, I understand that so-and-so agency, so-and-so writer has a new screenplay coming out, make sure that you call over there and get it. That sort of thing. Or you would do it yourself. The point is that was very analog at first, and then with advent of Web 2.0, it became the first they were called tracking boards, where it went online, where you could share chat groups, almost like kind of things. And once you had that, and those things became bigger and more people were using them, this is when the real trolls first started for screenplays, because people would just write, you know, there would be a premise that would be in this. So here, I just read this, it's really good. And then, oh my God, is that really, that's hot? That's getting traction at the studios? That really? Yeah, really? Okay, I guess I gotta get it. And then something, but yeah, or that sucked, that was horrible. I mean, I often tell my students that the comments that you might get on coverage from an agency, from a covering agency or something, is way different. How this they're much more proactive or much more constructive. That's the word, than what people say behind the scenes when they're really reading it. They really tear them apart. But to get more back to what you were saying, yeah, I think there's just so much that's okay. Because the really bad stuff never really makes it past the agencies. So there's just so much that's okay that it becomes frustrating when you read week after week after week, nothing that gets you exciting. So you're kind of like have this, you get maybe a little bit jaded, a little frustrated, because your job when you work in development is to find stuff to turn into films and television series. And so when you're getting things that are just a lot of okay, or at least then, you might have this mentality of like 99% of everything is garbage, when really it's like 99% of stuff is, and that's that one that will break through that you could actually take, further down the line. It gets even more than that. I've seen like that 1 out of 100 goes even further. It's 1 out of 100 scripts gets put into development. I've heard that 1 out of 1 script get actually considered to go to pilot or to be serious development, and then 1 out of another 100 actually get made. I don't know if those percentages are the same, but that was a long-standing thought, that it was just a lot of filtering before you actually got to something like that American Pie script.
And so then the other 99% aren't necessarily garbage, as you say, they're just okay.
They're just okay.
Okay, that's fair. I think that's a fair, maybe of that 99, maybe 1% of those maybe is garbage, maybe not, who knows?
Look, the okay has a spectrum too, okay? There is the, wow, that's really, they just didn't nail, like the act breaks don't work. Or it's a great concept, but they didn't just execute it quite well enough, and then you do have on the other end where it's just like, wow, that got represented, really? But those became fewer and far between, I think.
How can you tell if a writer has rushed through the writing of their screenplay?
Right. So a lot of that has to do with the internal logic of the script, the choices the characters are making, and the dialogue that they're saying. Oftentimes, it doesn't reflect how they truly are feeling. Now, I should say that, yes, actions speak more than words, and a character can be saying one thing but really feeling another. And that actually can be very good writing. And not rushed, that can be actually a very nuanced, sophisticated way of developing characters. But you can tell that if, in a way, they're just saying just to get through the scene, or to get around a point that might be sticky. Like, for example, if there's obviously an obstacle that we would think, I'm blanking on one right now, but if there's an obstacle in the way and they're just trying to get around it very quickly to get on to the next bit, you can sometimes think that they've rushed through that. I also feel that they haven't thought about the theme thing again. They haven't thought about the message again. They're leaving meat on the bone for situations where the characters could find themselves in, or the story could go, that could explore the theory in the theme in a different way. Perhaps they haven't done enough research on what they're trying to discuss about, or the world that they've created. Maybe they haven't thought of another way that create obstacles for the character. And if you live long enough in the world, you start thinking like, well, wait a second. If you have a character who's, in a hospital, for example, and I've been in a hospital, I'm sure you've been in a hospital, most people have been in a hospital or a doctor's office of some sort, and you have there's security these days and just security cameras these days. And there's, it's very difficult to just walk into a hospital and go into into certain areas and just access sensitive places. And so, that's just from an action standpoint. You have to think about that. How would a character get from A to B to C to D? And what would they say? And what would they wear? And what would they do? And there's a lot of people there's a lot of obstacles of security guards and nurses and other patients and doctors and, how do you blend in? So that's where I feel like people might rush, is either the character's dialogue isn't, or actions aren't matching how they should really be feeling at that time, which is what I think I was trying to allude to before, along with not exploring all of the aspects that they possibly could to make a script believable and deep and rich. That could even go to, okay, so I had a student of mine. This is a good example of not rushing. I had a student of mine, she was from India. And where she was, there was a lot of these, there was a lot of going off to England or the US or to Europe to get educated and to make a lot of money that you could send back home, right? It's very similar to here in LA, people from Latin America doing that, right? So she wrote a script about a woman who was in this situation, who was going to university but was dancing at night in an exotic club to make the money because her student visa didn't allow her she could only work a certain number of hours. Not enough for her living in the UK and also to send back to India. And the way she had set up this in the script, that her mother has constantly bugging her, she needed money by a certain day. Okay, so she's dancing in a club, and something happens where the police catch her, and she eventually gets caught by the cops and taken to like the Homeland Security of the UK, right? So you see her in there, and what you find out is, and in every step of the way, all the plot points that she had, all the obstacles that the student had, because we talked about it a lot, was what are all the obstacles that one would go through if you came here from India, you had to get educated, you had to send all this money, and you only could work so many hours, and what would be all the problems that one would have? And one would be losing your job, and another one would be getting, the people that you're renting finding out that this is happening and getting kicked out of your place. So now you're homeless and you got no money and you have a student visa. Maybe the university would find out about it and you might get kicked out of that too. And now how are you going to get back home? And then if you go back home, are you going to be seen as like the person who was the last hope who failed? Right. Especially as a woman. Mm-hmm. So the last shot of it is she goes through and she does all these things happen, and she finds herself in this holding pen with, and they set up these conversations that the mother from home was going. You find out that the money was needed because her brother was on life support. Oh, wow. And because they couldn't afford it, they were going to shut it off. Oh. Okay, so you have now, in this scenario, you have a social commentary, you have all the steps of possible obstacles that this writer researched that could possibly be a problem that some of her friends had, okay? And this was a very real thing. And then she did this all, actually, it was a short script. This was only like a 12-minute film, maybe short, 10. But it was tense, and it was real, and it was authentic, and it did not feel rushed because she sat down and she thought about every possible beat along the way that could be used, and every obstacle that could be used to talk to the message and the theme that she's talking about that deals with this greater world of poverty and a chance at a better life, and trying to overcome those obstacles when they're stacked against you.
And so this was, did she make this into a feature, or this was always
a short? This was always a short, but what she did, she was just talented. So she then used that short and another short she made while she was at the school. And it was something similar. That one was about, I can't remember what the Indian word, the Hindi word for it is, but British or Western, Indian men living in the West will go to India, especially the small rural villages, and they will say that they will marry girls there and then bring them back to the West and hope for a better life and send money back to them. And these are usually maybe undereducated people in the societies. So what they will do is they will marry them in the village. There will be a dowry, which will be most of the money that this family has. The man will go back to, say, London and say, okay, I'm going to get us a place and then I'll send tickets for you so you can fly there. And then they disappear.
Oh, wow.
They never hear from him again. And the woman, the girl in the village, is now outcast. She's a disgrace. So now she's got that hanging over her head the whole time.
Right.
This had happened, these were common stories that she knew of all the time. So she essentially did a short film of that situation.
Wow.
And in doing so, all the, getting on a ticket, flying over there. She flies up, she shows up, she has to go find this guy. She doesn't know anybody. And she has all the steps that she thought about, all the steps that one would have to go to, all the obstacles that one have to do. And what do you do when you finally confront this person who basically is like, I don't know you, right?
Wow.
And that sort of thing. Between those two films, okay, she had these two scripts and shorts that got into film festivals and whatnot. She then went back to India and she started making movies there, features.
Wow.
And she had lots of ideas that were all socially conscious things, so that problems that women were facing in India, or that underrepresented communities, from various places of India were going through, and sort of, maybe fish out of water stories where, a traditional person from Mumbai might be going into one of these communities and, dealing with something. Yeah.
Right, and the sense of you don't actually really have a home because
Yeah.
you're not welcome here, but then you're also not welcome
There.
back where you quote unquote came from.
That's right.
And that feeling of being kind of without a country,
Exactly.
Yeah.
And you're an undereducated person living. You've spent all your money to fly 10 hours to the UK, to London. You don't know anybody. You don't barely speak the language. How do you get by? How do you do that when your family has disowned you? Now you're here. This is your last shot.
Right.
And how do you, and then you could see how that could be developed into a TV series. Like, how does this woman then survive in the UK if she can't get back? In fact, you can see how her first film and this film could very much link up together in a certain way.
Right. And keeping the secret, that you don't have, your papers are not in order, your visa's expired or whatever it is.
Right.
You don't have a visa, yeah.
Right. What is she going to, she might not have enough money to get back, or she did get back, then what's the life she has when she gets back? And those sort of like real world conundrums. The one thing that she did, and this would be useful, is when you have these social causes or social concepts, it's very easy to just hammer the social cause, okay? But it needs to be entertaining to a certain point. It's got to have a thriller element to it in this case, or a drama element to it in this case. And one of the things I told her, or we did, I and the other lecturers, were structure it as if it was a thriller or a drama, a thriller, like Traffic, or like 23 grams. I can't remember that one.
With Naomi Watts.
Something like that, where that it was like that. So if you can structure it like that, you, as Steven Soderbergh said, you hide in the genre.
Okay.
Okay, so you get out what you need, you get your message out, and through all the beats of the story and through the characters, and the characters can also, that she meets could be forces of antagonism to represent the institutions or the problems that she would face, or that would represent greater problems on higher levels.
Wow. Yeah, no, that's fascinating because the stakes are so high, and then she wouldn't know who to trust.
Right.
And since, since the last 20 years, they're the paranoia, the fear of the other.
Of the other, absolutely.
And right, and all just backs against the wall. And the stigma of working in a club, or a dowry that's gone, awry, or I don't know what the terminology would be, but yeah, there's a stigma.
Yep. And also, you said the other from her entering the other, and or the other being here, but the other goes the other way, goes both ways. She sees the UK as the other.
Sure.
Right,
Mm-hmm.
and the UK sees her as the other, and
Right.
where those two things collide, that's usually where drama leads. Those ironies is usually where drama lies. That's usually where you get a lot of tension, right? And that's where you can get great plot. Well, I'm sorry, stories.
Get an idea, write it down, rewrite.
Yes.
Sounds easy, but is it?
No. But it's the truth.
Okay, how come most people struggle with this though?
Why do people struggle? Well, because writing is difficult. I think anyone does. I'd say even John Steinbeck, probably when he was sitting down at his typewriter and, had problems. Charles Dickens and Jane Austen probably all had trouble at some point, even though they had great ideas and great themes that going. Writing is hard, and it's something that we teach people, is that it's the one thing that you need the least amount of equipment to do. Okay, I mean, you really just need a pen and a piece of paper, but yet it's a lot of up here. First, it's a lot of research. It's a lot of writing to find that right idea. It's a lot of reflection to find out when you do research on a concept that interests you. How does everything connect, and what are the nuances of that? That takes time. That takes a lot of people want to just rush right to the final draft, or rush right to the screenplay software and just start going. And that, to me, that leads to disappointment, frustration, and madness, quite frankly.
And not the good kind of madness
Not
that
the
you
good
need
kind,
to be a writer? Okay.
No. And so finding the concept, then understanding it, the nuances of it, and how that can relate to characters, what characters would be in that world, the problems that they face, and the truths about humanity that you're trying to say in these things, takes a while to get it. And then once you can structure that into a 3-act thing, or teleplay, or whatever it is, you need to let it sit for a while to go back and get some space from it, so that you can say, oh, that doesn't work. I didn't quite get that character dialogue correct. Those two characters represent the same thing. I can combine them into one, make it more efficient. There's a better act break I could do there. There's a higher stakes thing there that has more meaning, okay? Or even in the process, there's a script I'm working on right now where, you realize, you find that resource where you realize what you thought about a character or a person or a situation isn't entirely what you thought it was, okay? And it's slightly different. And when that happened to us, we found out I'm writing a biopic right now about a music producer, and he was from the 60s and the 70s. And there were certain things about how he interfaced with the social and political elements of the time. Okay, did he or didn't he at certain points, or certain, and we found out, we thought he hadn't, but it turns out he had. Okay, at a certain point in his career, and now all of a sudden we're like, well, based on what we're saying about this person, the tenets of his life, what he believed in, his philosophies. Do we need to include this? Do we not? Does it change anything? Because if it does, it changes things. And it turns out, yes, it did matter. So we have to put that in. And then that might mean backtracking all the way through to the beginning to make sure that the lessons learned from the social justice things that he was involved with would track all the way through his character and be true. And when we went back and looked, we realized, oh, they were there. We were just focused on other things. And in doing so, it made the story deeper and better.
I think you've said that a writer should be honest with how they see the world.
Right.
That honesty and that voice will seep into their writing.
Yeah. Okay. Yes. I believe writers need to have a point of view. Filmmakers need to have a point of view. I think probably directors of photography need to have a point of view. Everyone having a point of view on how you see the world is important, not to just be passive in the world. You need to be active within the world and how you see it. And especially with writers, there's no such thing as being, you're always subjective when you're writing these things. You're always from what words you choose to what characters you choose, what they say, where you place things, and even you're making decisions. You have a point of view of how you're doing these things, and to fight that, to not have a way of thinking, a way of speaking, I think is disingenuous to being a writer. Your point there is to shine a light on humanity. Your point of what you are meant to say some truths. And even if you're doing comedy usually comes from truth, does it not? And so if you're being too surfacey, if you're being too cool, okay, you're going to get a very thin, I'm trying to think of the right adjective, a very, not unusable, that's the wrong word, but the script's not going to mean anything. The story's not going to mean anything. It's not going to resonate. That's the word I was trying to look for. It's not going to resonate with audiences in any sort of way. And so I feel that with all those scripts that we said earlier, of the 99% that aren't good, a lot of that might be that people are just trying to be cool, or they think of a good situation, but they're not putting their stamp on what does it all mean. Okay, the message of what they're trying to say. What are they exploring? Even if it is a broad comedy, you're exploring something, whether it's The Hangover and you're exploring, that time when you're about to get married and the responsibilities that come from that, and the friendship that comes from people who have known each other for a long time. Even if it's broad and, over the top, it's still there. And that's what underpins those characters. They're still saying something about that, even if, guys getting out of a car and they're impaling mattresses on the top of a casino or whatnot. And so if you're not trying to say something, if you're just trying to do something because it's cool or fun, okay, and you're just staying at that level, you're not really giving a point of view or anything. Or the point of view you're giving is that you don't really care. You're just being passive in the world. And I kind of feel that is the hardest thing that I have to say to my students, especially when, I'm talking to, 18 to 22-year-olds who want to get into the writing or into the film world. They write a lot of derivative things because they don't really have, they might not have a complete world of view yet of who they are. They're just developing that. So they wouldn't be cool if we took Die Hard and put it on a boat. I'm just, saying that sort of thing. Or an Avengers type thing or a Stranger Things type thing, but they would just be their version of it. But it's just special effects and action scenes and cool lines. It doesn't have any meaning underpinning it. And that is the hardest thing that we have to get to and across the writers. I feel that even though they're 18 to 22, I feel often that any new writer, anyone who is entering art on anything, whether it's painting or sculpting or acting or music, if you're not trying to put feeling into it or meaning into the craft, you're going to end up with something flat.
And that being said, though, on the flip side, as you mentioned earlier, a Steven Soderbergh sort of line where you can weave the theme or the message sort of into the story without it being heavy-handed, and I'm butchering that, but
Yeah.
what was it exactly? Because you said, this woman from India, she wrote these great screenplays, but sounds like she didn't beat you over the head with the message.
She did what Steven Spielberg said, that when he wants to get his social themes out, he wants to hide them in a genre. And that's one way to do it is, okay, you want to write a thriller type thing, or a comedy, or an action picture, or even a romantic comedy, and you want to give it some depth. What is the central thing, the problem between the characters, or that the lead characters have? And then explore what all those could be, and figure out how those could be obstacles along the way to create drama and tension. And in doing so, opportunities for comedy, or opportunities for thrilling moments, set pieces for action that relate to those obstacles that you've found. But because you're doing it in this sort of sugar-coated way, maybe, I don't know, that's the right way, a palatable way. The audiences will take the medicine easier that way, I suppose.
Okay, so if we have a spectrum, one side being completely passive, and some people, that's their coping mechanism for life,
Sure.
especially recently. Don't want to know, don't want to think about it, don't want to see it. So if you have blinders on, you might not be able to kind of go there, but at the same time, if you're so dialed in, there's going to be too much of an agenda with the film.
That's a very good way of putting it, quite frankly. There is a happy medium that you have to strike between being entertaining but meaning something. And when you can find that sweet spot of marrying, and it's challenging, it's really difficult. I think all writers struggle with that ultimately. Once you can find that sweet spot and then marry it with understanding story theory, right? That's when you can be successful.
If you are interested in storytelling, you may also like our new book, Story Questions, the sponsor of today's video. It's a story tool that offers you over 1,500 story questions that you can use as story prompts. It's packed with over 40 categories, so whether you are in the brainstorming stages, developing characters, dialogue, or rewriting, it can help you at every stage of the writing process. Think about this statement. Most powerful stories are just great answers to strong questions. We've linked up to story questions in the information section below. Now back to the interview. You are a teacher in the UK,
Yes.
is that correct? And so you teach film and television or writing? And
Correct, film production,
production.
University of Portsmouth.
Oh, okay. And what percentage of the students are native to the UK?
90% of them are British, and then there's another 10 that come from everywhere. China, Central Europe, and we get one of the places we get are a lot of Eastern European country. We had one girl who came from UK. Sorry, not the UK, Ukraine.
Oh, wow.
Okay, which in this day and age was interesting. And she had an interesting perspective, getting back to what we were talking before. So we talked about some of her stories that she wanted to, about her film that she wanted to make. And we talked about the war and whatnot and all that. And she said, I don't really want to do that myself. There's other parts of my culture I'd really want to talk about. And I was like, okay, like what? And she said, well, have you ever heard of, you probably have heard of the character Baba Yaga if you're a
Yes.
John Wick fan, right? And she says, but that comes from my country. And I'd like to tell something about that, like where it comes from, who she is, and maybe tie that to what's going on right now. And that was, and we worked through that about that fairy tale. But what we try to tell us, and so this ties into some of the other things about what we've been saying, is if you have something from your past, or your culture, whether that's in this case Ukrainian or British, or maybe you're from the South in the States, or you're from Seattle or whatever, there's something that might be in your life or from your culture that is unique to you and your point of view. Those are great places to start with for telling stories. I believe Greta Gerwig, her story Lady Bird, right? Her film Lady Bird, that was her growing up, So the lessons learned from that and the situations coming from something like from there in Northern California where she was from, we hadn't seen much of that before. And, even though the mother-daughter relationship and what she was seeing around with a teenage girl growing up was something that we have seen before in film, her unique spin on it and what Lady Bird went through made it unique. Same with this young woman from the Ukraine who was telling a story about how that witch character is seen in her culture and then tied it to kids disappearing, it was kind of a Hansel and Gretel kind of thing going on, which was something that was happening with the war going on, the kids getting taken, right? And then you have that woman we were talking about earlier, the filmmaker, the Indian filmmaker, and all that came from her culture. So at least from your stories, if you can find something or issues you have from your growing up or from that happened that really, really well, those are great places to start.
Do you ever see where someone can get caught up in their own culture and the idea of what's a good person and what's a bad person? And maybe it's a very gray area. It's not where anyone's harmed someone,
right,
but that they can't get it out of their head that, well, a good male or female would never do this because their role is this.
Right.
And how it's maybe hard to free themselves from that? Or is that not something they need to worry about because they're trying to write from a place of authenticity?
Whenever I've experienced that, that's usually because you know it so well, you don't have that problem. Usually, if you know it well, you understand who that person is. What you're really figuring out is how complicated that person is. And then what I would suggest is you lean into the complexity of that person. Okay, the good and bad. Of course, you're going to probably change it a bit to fit into the storytelling paradigm, if you will. The needs of telling a movie or of writing something like that. But generally speaking, I find that isn't so much. The larger problem is being so detailed into it and so insular and so inside baseball that it's impenetrable to the outside world. Okay, so you have to strike a balance between all the detail and the problems of the world and who these characters are, and then putting that onto some sort of story that is accessible. It's sort of, in a way, the other side of the coin of the hiding in the genre. Is you want to give them a medium that people can latch on and go and understand, but it can't be so impenetrable that and so dense that that the audience gets lost.
I see. Okay, so there has to be something that we can identify with.
Yes.
Doesn't matter where we're from.
Right. I would suspect that even at some point, the writer in that situation, there might be some meat left on the bone that they haven't fully been able to get to or get out because of the conventions that they have to adhere to in order to tell a story of that way. I would assume that there's just certain levels that they just can't get to because they are either too esoteric or just wouldn't work on film. They work much better in a novel, for example.
In your writing, how do you know you have a story that you really want to tell?
It's when I can't stop thinking about it. That's usually the first that's the first clue. This happened recently, actually, a film that I was writing before the one that I'm writing now. So I grew up in, we were talking about growing up, and I grew up in sort of upper middle class thing. Most of the people in my family have degrees. They went to university, college. They, 1 degree, 2 degree, 3 degrees, and they went to work. And it was more of a career over family world that I came into. And when you get into that mode, you start mixing with kids who are like-minded, right? So you go to university, and most of the people there are career over family. And then I move out here to Los Angeles, and you're working in industry. Most people are career over family to begin with. They're all trying to make it in some way, and people don't have families until, if they do, until much later on in life, often cases, if they do, even if they have them at all, okay? And when I left LA and I moved to this one part of the UK, I found myself in a much different world, fish out of water, where I was outside my son's school, talking to a woman who was younger than I, probably about 10 years. And our kids were coming out of the school together. And I said to, my son says, hey, can I have a play date with John? And I said, well, I'll just talk to John's mom here and we'll sort it out. The woman turns to me and she says, oh, I'm not John's mom, I'm his grandmother.
Oh, wow.
Okay. And I was sort of like, backtrack, right? And it's like, all right, well, we'll talk to your mom and we'll start. And this kept happening over and over and over and over and over again. Okay. And I realized that, that I was the unusual one in this situation. And it probably made me think back in that hometown of mine that probably family before career was more common than I thought it was. And there's probably this whole other world out there that was foreign, that I didn't know about because I was young and now I was seeing. So that was on my mind a lot. I was thinking about that a lot now, having come to this new place and experiencing this new paradigm where family was more important than career was more important than family. And so when I read a book that a colleague of mine had written, a novel about a 18-year-old woman who is going to be the first one in their family to go to college, to university, and she comes from a long line of teen moms. And the summer before she's supposed to go, she gets pregnant. And then the book uses sort of a Groundhog's Day technique to show all the choices that she could potentially make. This was on my mind. I read this book and I knew that this was a good idea, okay? Because I'd been really thinking about it a lot, and it was something that was weighing on me. Now, often you don't get perfect kismet like that, but at least now my brain was open to that. So I often find that if there's something bothering me in the world, if there's something I'm constantly thinking about or wondering, why doesn't that work? This is really good if you're going to make documentary films too. But if there's something that just you can't let go all the time, you're researching, you find yourself gravitating it, that is probably a great place to go because you can't consume enough of the world, right? That you're going to go the extra mile in research. You're going to get to know who these characters are. You're going to probably write down in your notes, that happens, this happens, this happens, that happens. That's an obstacle. That's a character. That's a potential antagonistic force. Okay, these are the possible outcomes that could happen. This is how they're perceived in a positive way. This is how they're perceived in a negative way, or in between those two poles, right? And that's where you're going to get the nuance. If there's something that's bothering you, if there's something you can't stop thinking about, that's probably a realm where there's a good story and a good concept. You just got to dig.
Wow, that's fascinating. So that little instance of being outside of your child's school and realizing, in a sense, how much more of a fish out of water you were.
Right.
And wow, and it's a good thing you thought that was the mom and not the grandma.
Yeah. If it had gone the other way, it would have been horrible. I was going to say,
it went way better than if the opposite happened.
But I would also say this, now that you've just said that, is being open to those moments, Okay, there's a version of that story where I become really embarrassed. Well, I was embarrassed, but I become so embarrassed that I shut down and I go, "Oh, Jesus Christ, why did we move here? Why am I having problems with this? Why this keeps happening over? I can't stand this. I want to get out of here," right? And I shut down, and then maybe even that's something to explore as a possible story about why you do that. My guess is that if you're that closed off, you wouldn't do that you wouldn't explore it. But I was lucky that I left myself open to that, and was thankful that I was willing to explore that deeper. And at least when the book came along, I was able to be open enough to realize that, okay, even though that's not a type of story that I would normally write, that's the right story for me.
Wow.
Now at this point in my life.
Sure. Had you grown up there, maybe it would be nothing that would cross your mind. It would be so normal.
Well, that's an interesting point, because the author of the book did have that instance. So she's coming at it from more like the Greta Gerwig Lady Bird story way. This is her experience of what she got and everything that she experienced being an 18-year-old or I think she was even younger, having a child and all the prejudices that she had and the struggles she had and also the great things that she had. All the insensitive things that people said to her, right? And the stigmas, but also the wonderfulness of when you have a kid and the good things that come from that. And then all the struggles that come from that and the sleepless nights and the on and on and on and on it goes. So you're right, probably in a way that it's possible that if I had grown up there, I might not have been open to that because it was so normal. And that it would have taken something extraordinary for me to open my eyes to that. Perhaps as a male, I would have looked at something else, something that had to do with football, soccer, or some sort of male-oriented thing. I don't know. It's an interesting question.
Right. That's why I had asked earlier about just these roles, so much as the different cultural roles, even if the culture is many generations removed from the original place and they're in the States, there's all sorts of cultural expectations and stigmas. And
I think that if you're from, that can be, and that's where if you're in it and you're open to it, and if you reflect upon it, that is this normal or isn't this normal, and how does that look judged against other world? That's where you can find some interesting stories because you're of it and you know it really well. Conversely, if you come into it, as I did, as a fish out of water with fresh eyes, you're like, that's not what I'm used to. Why is that like that? That is another way into the world. I would often say that you probably, successful TV series where you have writers' rooms, you probably want a mix of the two, I would think. Because then you get sort of, one says this is how it is, and the other one could say, but you're in it so much, you might miss this interesting thing that you think is normal, but I think is extraordinary, right? Some nuance of the life or the culture or the problems of the world, and then I think between the two and maybe others, that's how you can build a really interesting show. Or if you're a writing team, you could you have two sets of eyes or multiple sets of eyes to really milk the world for what it is.
Right, the Norman Lear, as you said earlier, the A coming against
Yes.
B, and then the C comes in.
Yes.
Why is it important for a writer to know the ending of their story before they begin their pages?
Right. Most of the people that we interviewed in the book that we wrote, Screenwriters Advice, almost all those pro writers that we did, almost all 34 down to T, said that was important. I think you just need to know where you're going. If it's a whole thing, a story. So it's everything that you've set up in Act 1 or at the beginning needs to come to a crescendo at the climax and wrap up at the end. And I think if you don't know where you're going to, it's very easy to get lost along the way. You might follow tangents of story threads that don't take you there to where you want to go. Now, sometimes that might be good because, as I said before, that might be nuances that you didn't explore before. But generally speaking, once you have a sense of the world, once you know what's in that world, you know what you want to say, you know what potential endings are. You know where it's possible ways of where that story is going to go. Okay? There might be multiple choices. Maybe you choose the more obscure of them, but it's still authentic. And once you have that point in story time, then you can work backwards from there and say, okay, so the end of Act 2 might be that, because that would then, the character gets off their feet and they go towards that point, and then you're working backwards to the midpoint, and then you work backwards to Act 1, the journey the beginning of Act 2 where the journey starts that gets you to that point, and then you can go back into Act 1 where you set up the world that is different, where you start from who that character is, where they go and how they're different at the point, because you know where they are at the end. So the beginning, they have to be changed. Like they have to be changed on the way. So what would be either, I don't know, the opposite of what they are or different from then? And that kind of tells you where your starting point is. How that world is, because, as we go through time, you can never go back anywhere. You can never go home again, so to speak. It's never the same. You're always changed as you go through time in life. So this is, if you know the end, then you can kind of sense, well, what would be the beginning of that, where that character starts. And also there's the idea that the inciting incident of a story is resolved by the climax. That's a very common story theory thing. So if you know what the climax is, you can say, okay, then what would be the starting point, that first choice that has to be made, or first problem presented that gets you to this point. And usually once you have this, all the other stuff is much easier to do, especially if you're doing something like a mystery or a thriller that's twisty. If you know where you're ending, you can kind of go back. It's like when I remember talking to math teachers. Whenever they would have an algebraic problem on, I'd ask them, how did you know the answer is 6? How did you know that you would end up being 6? And they said, oh, because I knew I wanted the answer to be 6. And then I did the equation backwards to the first line of the equation, okay? And I knew that if you did it properly, you would end up at 6. And that's another way of thinking about knowing the ending.
So that's not what's termed non-linear storytelling?
No, non-linear storytelling means you're breaking time in some way. You're using flashbacks or flash forwards or multiple storylines where you're bouncing back in time, or going to different points in time. A linear story would be like more of the traditional 1950s, 60s, 70s, 80s story like Rocky. You're with Rocky every scene as he goes forward to having that big fight at the end. That's kind of linear. One thing happens, the next thing happens, the next thing happens, solve a problem, next thing happens. That's linear. But obviously something like Memento, actually even Memento is kind of linear backwards, but something like The Avengers, where you have lots of different storylines going on, or I'm blanking on something with lots of flash forwards or flashbacks, but that's really what nonlinear storytelling is.
But even within nonlinear storytelling, then we would need to know the ending so that we could reverse engineer it, because it would be maybe too complicated otherwise.
I think it would be really helpful. I think it would be really, really helpful. Like if, I can't imagine writing something like the Woody Harrelson True Detective, like that, like those episodes of something like that, where you didn't know where they want to go. Because there you are about that, it's non-linear, because you're going backwards and forwards, I think, to the murder, and because he's being interviewed in the present, but then you're going back in time to the actual events of the murder that they're trying to solve. And it's really twisty, and they're going every which way there in Louisiana. I couldn't imagine writing something like that without knowing how they're going to catch the person at the end.
How does a screenwriter not choose an obvious choice in their story?
Oh boy.
And
Okay.
what is an obvious choice?
Right. We have this exercise that we teach our students to do, and that writers can do that. So I learned it a long time ago, which is you want to keep the audience guessing. If the audience can guess what's going to happen next, I think we've all been there when this is going to happen, and then it happens, and maybe once you're like, oh, look how smart I am. But if it keeps happening over and over and over again, they're going to say this line, they say the line. If you can see the plot, and you know what's going to happen, that's not fun. You tune out to that sort of thing, or you turn it off, which is even worse. So if you can come up with the non-obvious choice, in that case, they've gone with an obvious choice where you could guess. Yes, that's the obvious thing that's the most logical thing the character can do. That's the most logical plot they can take. That's the most logical obstacle. In a way, it's not horrible because obviously it makes sense, but there's no intrigue there. There's nothing, maybe it's not, maybe some other paths could have been taken. And there's a exercise that we do with our students, along with other writers I worked with, is if you have a choice that a character can make based on the world that you know, and this is really helpful when you know your world really well and what the possible obstacles could be, right? Is what's the first thing you think that they could do? And then you write, the first thing comes to mind, and then throw that away. What's the second thing that comes to your mind? Great, throw that away. The third, fourth, or fifth thing that you can think up, that's usually the best choice, because it will work because it's within the world. It's a logical, sensible thing that could happen. But half the audience will probably think of the first thing. The other half of the audience might think of second thing. But you have to get someone who's really tuned in who'll come up with third, fourth, or fifth thing, and they're like, yeah, I knew that they would do that. And if great, good on you, well done you know the world. So I think that taking the time to really think about the choices you make, either on how you're going to build a character, the obstacles the characters have, or the choices that they need to make when interacting with other characters or antagonistic forces, finding something a little bit offbeat but still works within what you've set up, that's a way to make things interesting, to keep your audiences guessing and to keep them engaged.
I believe something you've said to your students is story always comes first. What does this mean to you? Right.
And this isn't, I think if we work in the industry, this is a very common thing. This is not some genius thing that I've come up with. Where it comes into play often, and it starts at beginner level, is people often get enamored with the cameras or the microphones or the special effects or the stunts or the whatever it is that is fun when you get on the set, okay? But all of those things are, in service of something else. Okay, they're all incredibly amazing crafts, and the people who do them are wonderful craftspeople with so much skill and artistic talent, makeup, props, editing, whatever. It's composers, everyone, all lending a hand in. But if you don't have a great story, they can't do anything, right? You can't even spend money really from a financier. You need that script. And the only way that script gets made is if the story and everything that we've been talking about here in this time works properly, okay? And it's difficult, but that's where you need to be spending most of your time. When I have film students, they don't really want to hear stuff like that. Well, that's not fair. They maybe haven't thought about that. I think when they're quite young, they just think, oh, cameras and lights and microphones and actors and, flash pots or however, digital explosions or whatever they do now. They don't really, I've had often students didn't really realize how crafted these things were. I was showing them episodes of Sex Education being played, of that, along with the script running side by side. And it wasn't actually the filming script, it was a development script. So I could say, look how they changed the lines, and look how they represented this camera movement, look at how they described the space that the characters are in. And they were surprised at how crafted the thing was and how much work went into the storytelling. I think you were talking about rushing, and I think that's the one area where you can't rush. You know, if it's like building the foundation of the house. If the foundation of the house is bad, and all the other stuff. So spend your time on your story, get the story right, get the characters correct. What are you talking about? What is this world? What are the obstacles? What's the drama? What's the tension? What are you trying to say? Work on that, and all the rest is fun.
Do we often think, though, that we as the writer are the hero, and that if we put in all these cool little scenes, it'll work, but really it has to make sense to the audience? And how do we know that, though?
Well, God, I really hope writers don't think that. Maybe writers that are inexperienced know that. I can't think, it's difficult. I know artists have egos, writers are artists, they can have egos and that sort of thing. And I think you have to, a delicate balance of tamping that down but you know, sticking up for yourself for the story is a balance there. I hope that, you know, I hope that writers would think everything we're doing is in service of the story. Okay? Everything I'm doing is in service of telling the best thing that I possibly can, right? And I'm going to take all these steps to do that as such. So should this piece of literature make it to the production stage, the craftspeople on the other side, you know, as led by the director, can make something worthy of what you've written. Okay? So, yeah, I truly hope that they are thinking that they can get past the "isn't it cool" and get to does it all work and does it make sense, and am I trying to say something? And, you know, I always think of, in this case, Almost Famous, when, you know, Patrick Fugit's having that dark night of the soul, and he calls back to Philip Seymour Hoffman and he says, you know, the only true currency you have in this world is what you share when you're uncool. And that's then the thing that unlocks his creativity and turns in the article to Rolling Stone. And I think that's the lesson here, is that if you have that truth, even if it's ugly truth and it's ugly to you, then you'll be all right.
What is your favorite story?
That's a big question. I think my favorite story is, my favorite book that I ever read was East of Eden, Steinbeck. He's my favorite writer, by far. I know a lot of people like Dickens, but he's my favorite one. And it has everything that I really like about storytelling in there. I realize it's not movies or TV, but it's got this big landscape of, you know, Northern California. It's got this Cain and Abel story in it, these two brothers, and what their family is going through. And I just like the epicness of it. But at the center of it, and it's usually all the characters have to answer it or talk about it in some way, is the difference between may and shall. Okay, thou mayest, they shall, which is and basically the difference between it's basically a free will or non-free will, or, you know, not free will story at its sense. But the way that Steinbeck did it, and he looked at it from different points of view. I think some of my favorite ones is there's a Chinese character. Talk about what was going on at the time. He had these immigrants coming in, Chinese immigrants that now make up a lot of San Francisco and Northern California in it. And he was part of this community, and he would go into the city and in his community, and they would be arguing about may versus shall, using their culture's definitions of those words. And what does that mean? And they would have long arguments above it. And then those discussions would directly be played out in what was going on between in the family, between the sons and the father and the wife of one of them, and the problem was going on with the business and whatnot. And I also love the way Steinbeck writes, because he often will be talking very common language about how people spoke in that time. So he'll be writing in very colloquial language of the time. And then when he goes into his narration, he'll talk in very sort of philosophical ways. And I love those two, the dichotomy of that. I love the juxtaposition of that. And even that sort of the characters that you think are very plain will often have epiphanies on such a level, okay, in very simple ways. They'll say something very simply, but is very profound. And I love that. And that's why that's my favorite story.
Have you ever gone back and kind of done a John Steinbeck tour and seen where he lived and where he was a writer? And
we did a bit of that. We went up north a little bit, up through the Central Coast and along the central coast, and also the Central Valley. I have been up there a bit, and it's great. I mean, it's one of the reasons I love California, is that you have these, not everything is hot, and not everything is the beach and the sunshine. Everything is all these different communities, different political viewpoints, different cultural viewpoints. The whole idea that you think that you have these two enormous cities, but yet in the middle is where everything is grown.
Right.
And I think that plus the whole Pacific rocky coast that's different every time you make a turn. I just love that sort of soup.
And how does John Steinbeck's work influence your work?
I think it's that thing that I said at the end. It's common, this sort of everyday people experiencing profoundness or understanding profoundness, getting to a truth of some sort, or epiphany or realization, at least what they think it is, okay? And then even if that's false, then this is usually what I'm trying to say, is this. But I usually tend to write common. I don't tend to write fantastical things. I tend to write, everyday people. And I think that that's probably what I take for it, and trying to get to that simple truth.
And what is it about, especially in this new day and age of social media influencer and people going viral, and we being so fascinated with some story of somebody having an argument on an airplane, and then we want to know, who is this person? And what is it about this simple person that is not really simple, but maybe to the tabloids, it's not something that's worth writing about? What is that person to you?
If I understand your question correctly, I think that, we all have, I think that a common person going through, or an ordinary person going through something extraordinary, or at least extraordinary to them, okay, is always a great place to start a story from, because it happens to all of us. We've all had, you probably today had something where you started today, you thought it was going to this happen, and then something tripped you up, okay? Probably, right? And that led you to this and that and that. And even if it's like, if I had just gone left instead of right, or if I had made eggs instead of bacon, okay, my life, things would have been different. Maybe you got sick from the bacon, right? And that ruined all your things for the day. Whatever it is, I think it goes back to what we've been saying this whole time. If you have a world that people can understand, or that you understand really well, and you can find out what the obstacles would be and who the characters would be in those world, you can make it then, and if it's as close to our world as possible, it can be accessible to those that you're trying to tell the story. If I was trying to tell a story about how bacon made me sick and I had ruined my day to someone who doesn't know what bacon is, or doesn't eat bacon, or is completely a nightlife person, and they don't have that experience of waking up in the morning, they're kind of like, yeah. But I think most, but it's the key thing there is, even though eating the bacon and getting sick from it most people have it, it's my experience of doing it And then it's up to me as the writer when I'm conveying the story to take my spin on to make it interesting, and so on and so forth. Everything I've been saying this whole thing.
In your new book, Screenwriter's Advice, you have a section where Marcia Green talks about being nervous before pitches. And I believe she quotes a poem, like a haiku, and she says, "Stop asking if I'm good enough, ask only if I'm showing up with love. I can't control what's happening outside of me." And I thought that was so brilliant. You know, she talks about fear of pitching. Can we touch on that a little bit?
Sure. I mean, oftentimes oftentimes writers are introverted people. You know, I think it's a pretty common trope. I think it's true. Not all of them, but many are. And so getting up and trying to sell to people and to be able to condense your story down into something, 5-10 minutes long in order to try and get others to buy, or be interested in or wanting to come on board is daunting, I think, to people. And you spent all this time making something and then you go out and present it, and after 10 minutes they could just go and it's done, and that can be disheartening. So I think the performance anxiety and everything that's riding on everything that you writers build up, that they feel everything's riding on what you're on a pitch. I can definitely see where nerves come in. My students get very nervous when they pitch to us, especially if you haven't done it very often. So really, I think, in this case, Marcia, a great Canadian writer, I think that's right. All she can do is go in there and know your story inside and out. I forget if it's Albert's. There's an expression that says, if you can't explain your idea succinctly, you don't really know it. Okay, I forget who said that. Einstein? I forget who said that. But that's kind of the same thing. That's a way to get over the nerves, know it really well, and then present it. And if you go in there warmly and open-heartedly and maybe say why the story is important to you, why it matters to you, why you love it, to get back to the love, I think that's a way that you can, A, overcome fear, B, make it seem personal to the people you're pitching. They might be more intrigued to come on board or inclined to come on board. So yeah, I think she's right about that.
And showing up with love, is that, and maybe the love won't be reciprocated?
It's possible. I mean, if you look, I know other places in the book when people talk about their horror pitching stories, because we did ask, I think, what's the worst pitching story that you ever have? A lot of this happened over the pandemic when they were doing Zoom, where people were checking their watch, or someone fell asleep during a pitch or something like that. So yes, often the love can not be reciprocated, but you just have to sort of, then they're not the right people for it. And if they did take it, it would probably be a nightmare. So find someone else.
I believe you said that notes are just opinions and that they aren't personal.
Yes. When people are giving feedback on your stories, it's what they think is right. They might not be able to give you story theory back of what it is, but what this people are giving is they want to make it better for you. Okay, the whole, when you get notes either from an executive or a producer or your colleagues or whatever, they're trying to help you make it better, or at least think about it in a different way. These people are not, they're not, I can't imagine someone would be interested in actually hamstringing a writer by giving them notes. I can't imagine that. If they were, then the notes are worthless anyway. And so it is business in a way. It's not personal. They're not trying to cut you down. They're actually trying to help you in their way. Where it gets a little tricky is they might not be able to articulate exactly what's wrong or what to fix. And quite frankly, that's not their job to really do that. Their job is to say, this didn't work. Okay, I'm feeling this character's development isn't right. This story beat doesn't feel authentic, or maybe it's not as interesting. This joke isn't as great as it could be, or the world is murky, whatever it is. So it's up to you, the writer, to say, take all that back and say, first of all, are they right? And second of all, if they are right, how do I fix it? And yeah, I mean, it is their opinion. Now, if you're there, but their job is to give you their opinion, right? In those situations, if it's just a friend who's reading your script and giving you notes and they don't have any knowledge of this world, then, I mean, take things with a grain of salt. But ultimately, you should do what you feel is right, keeping your mind open that if they are bumping up against something and multiple people are bumping up against something, something's wrong. And it's your duty as a writer to try and fix that.
And so could we argue that the secret to success as a writer is not just finishing screenplays and getting them out there, is being able to receive notes well?
Certainly an ingredient of it. I think finishing a screenplay and a finished screenplay is useful. I mean, it is useful. It is a thing. There's probably many writers who have half-written stuff. I do. Have half-written stuff or things that are ideas that you just could never commit to paper or to word processing. So there is currency in the finished thing, but being open to making it better is important, you know?
As a university teacher, you teach in university, do you ever see yourself in the class, in the front row, sitting in the back? Is there ever like a moment where you see someone very similar to you and you can see sort of the maybe mistakes or the hopefulness, or there's sort of an epiphany that you have?
All the time, every day, you know? And it happens a lot when I'm lecturing, when I go over a concept. And I think it somehow, as I'm explaining it, it flashes back into my mind of, oh yeah, I remember the first time when I was making my student films or whatever, that I experienced that problem, you know, or I had that hopefulness that this is going to be great. And then we went out and shot it. That didn't work at all, you know, and seeing the hope in their eyes, but also also that look in their eyes of like, well, this is a lot harder than I thought it was going to be. You know, it's great, but it's also, I thought this was going to be a cakewalk, or you know, I made all these films in my backyard, but to now start thinking about them on a much deeper and meaningful level, and to see their eyes light up at that is wonderful. And I remember at that time and I'll tell you actually what the biggest thing is the can-do effort, idea of them is like, we're going to make that thing. We're going to figure out a way to wrangle everything we need to make this thing on like a shoestring. We're going to do it. And that sort of get out and, get to itness. I don't know what the word is, but that attitude is, I think, what I see in a lot of them, because I know I had that in me when I was their age. And it's great when you see them go out and make something happen that they thought was going to be really difficult, like getting a well-known composer who's going to donate some music to their short, which just happened.
Oh, that's
or, getting an actor that their cousin 3 times removed knows, and they were able to get that person to come in and do a cameo or a day of work, or they figure out some lighting technique or build a model that really works. And that's sort of, and they make it happen, like just digging stuff out of the trash and making a landscape out of it. That looks amazing. Yes, so yes, I do see that old me in them like every day.
What about if you see their hopes dashed? Life isn't always an upward trajectory.
No, I mean, not everyone in that lecture hall is going to make it. But I would also say that the filmmaking industry, although we think of drama and television and all that, there's offshoots. So a lot of my students find work in other ways. a lot of them end up working for advertising agencies, or there'll be a YouTuber who needs camera work or, help lighting their in-house studio, or wherever it is. News, they'll go into news, or sports, or, just about anything. There's all these different ways. Some will end up, they think they want to be a director, they'll end up in post. Some will end up in the art department. So, maybe it's more like they don't make it as a director, but they find some other way to do that. And yes, some do fall out, because that happens too. We get a bunch of students who often will say this isn't for me. And that happens. And then they go off and they go off and do something else.